This is episode 126 of Stand Up with Pete Dominic. Joining me today, investigative journalist from the Asbury Park Press and ProPublica, Andrew Ford, and activist and comedian, the great Ted Alexandro. I am Pete Dominic. It's time to stand up with me right now. Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 126. It is Monday, June 15th. We are just a little under a week away from the longest day of the year here in North America, and I'm very excited. Keeping a close watch on the sunrise and sunset. Enjoying being out in my garden each and every day. Everything is starting to bloom and blossom, and somehow I'm holding the critter at bay now. Haven't had to kill anything yet. Spread the pepper around, and looks like he's not getting in. I fortified the perimeter a couple of more times, got my surveillance cameras going. Anyway, hope you had a good weekend. Lots to discuss here at the top, and I've got two awesome guests joining me on the program today, so thank you, all of you, for tuning into this podcast, Stand Up with Pete Dominic. I am acutely aware that many of you are listening to the beginning of the show or even the entire show in double speed or speed and a half, and I highly recommend it. No matter what podcast app you are using, you probably have that functionality, the speed and a half or double speed, especially here at the top when I'm just rambling and talking about the news and so on. But I think even the interviews, I was talking to my friend Matty B, and he was telling me, no offense, but I listened to the show in double speed, and I was like, none taken. Thank you for listening to the show. Whatever gets you through it and all the information into your brain and heart, I'm happy to have you listening, and I'm very happy to have you paying for a subscription to this show as well, because I could not do it without your support. So many of you now supporting the podcast. Very excited about how well it's going. Things are going pretty good with me now on this show because so many people are subscribing. I need a lot more, and so tell your friends, because I cannot do this show every day without it. Okay, let's get to what the hell happened over the weekend and what's going on in the world. Are you paying attention? Did you look away? President went to West Point, where he insisted that the cadets join him so he could give a terrible speech, by the way. I mean, not that any of his speeches are good, but, I mean, this one was just horribly low energy, and, of course, there is a lot of question about the fact that he cannot raise a glass of water to his freaking face. Did you see the video? Have you seen it? If you haven't, you got to watch it. He picks up a glass of water under the podium, and he brings it up with his right hand, but he can't get his stupid duck lips to the glass, so he has to bring his left hand and push the glass of water up. Trump and his surrogates attacking Joe Biden for gaffes and for being old and seemingly losing it, and Trump can't even hold a glass of water and get down a ramp. So a lot of question about the president's health declining, or, I mean, that's a weird one. Do you have to be a physician to figure that out? I don't think so. Why can he not get the glass of water to his face? Can anybody listening come up with an excuse? So that happened over the weekend, and he's facing new questions about his health as a result of the Watergate, as well as him gingerly walking down a ramp that he tweeted about it. He's like, it was slippery, I didn't want to fall. It wasn't slippery. There was no rain. What is the White House hiding? And why was Donald Trump rushed to Walter Reed last November? Everybody wants to know. All right. Also over the weekend, terrible police shooting in Atlanta, where a man was in the drive-thru. Apparently, he'd been drinking and he passed out, and police showed up. And now the video came out last night where he is running away from the cops, and somehow he got one of the tasers, I guess, of the cops. And he pointed at it and shot the taser at the cop, and then they shot him and killed him. As a result, the chief of police in Atlanta has resigned. Atlanta Police Chief Erica Shields, who was pretty widely respected, apparently, as far as police chiefs go, had a good relationship with the mayor there, Keisha Lance Bottoms, and she resigned Saturday after Garrett Rolfe fatally shot a 27-year-old black man, Officer Garrett Rolfe. The victim's name is Rashard Brooks. And so they fired the cop that shot him, and we'll see if charges are brought against him. But after Rashard Brooks failed a sobriety test, struggle ensued and ended with the police officer killing the guy while he was running away. And you've probably seen the video at this point, so you can judge for yourself. Pretty horrible. Not going to see these protests end anytime soon. They're continuing to happen all over the country. And Bradley Balco is a great journalist and author covering law enforcement and police officers. He had a really good Twitter thread I want to read to you here at the top. He said, the blacks commit 50% of homicides thing just isn't a persuasive rejoinder to the racial disparity in police shootings. Here's why. The overwhelming majority of a time when a cop kills, it is not to stop someone from killing someone else. Most of the time, it's in response to a, quote, furtive gesture at a traffic stop where a guy who flees an arrest and is thought to be reaching for his waistband, or a drug bust gone wrong, or a search or arrest warrant service that escalates, or a mental health crisis, or suicide. Police rarely kill someone to prevent, say, a revenge gang killing or an in-progress murder related to a turf war over drug sales. The proportion of homicides committed by black people just isn't all that relevant if you're trying to explain killings by police officers. You might as well say that the racial disparity in police shootings is justified, explained by the fact that black people are less likely to wear seatbelts. So don't make that argument. Radley Balco helping us all to understand that. And I highly recommend following that guy on Twitter. Speaking of which, a near universal majority of Americans now support changes to policing. Fascinating, rapid change going on in America right now. A near universal majority of Americans support at least some changes to policing, according to a survey by Huffington Post YouGov released on Friday. However, fewer than a third of Americans support defunding the police as opposed to other reforms like banning police chokeholds, which is backed by 73% of the population. Importantly, there's a lack of clarity around what it means to defund the police. And I think most of us don't really understand that, or we have different definitions. I, of course, think it means take money from the police budget and give it to other social services to perform the responsibilities that too often police have to perform, as well as completely reform and regulate law enforcement in America, redesign law enforcement in America. There's a lot to talk about with it, but defund the police, I think, is just there's just no nuance there. But we're having that conversation. What does that mean? It's important. Most respondents agreed that the phrase means significantly decreasing the size of police forces and the scope of their work. But some interpret the phrase as completely abolishing police forces. Americans are nearly evenly split on budgeting less money for your local police department and more for social services, which is what some say is the goal of defund the police activists. That's according to Huffington Post. So Trump at West Point, another killing in Atlanta. Protests continue. A Colorado man is accused of holding two roofing company salesmen at gunpoint because he believed they were Antifa. This guy, 65-year-old Colorado man named Scott Austin Gudmundson, faced 2 counts each of felony menacing and false imprisonment. How about that? That's a crazy story that out of Colorado. Officers responded to a report in which a caller claimed to see 2 members of Antifa, and a second person reported to officers that an armed man in technical gear was holding the 2 individuals at gunpoint on the ground. And that situation was resolved when cops took control. However, according to the account, the defendant was allegedly armed with 2 semi-automatic handguns. Turned out the 2 men being held at gunpoint told cops that they were door-to-door roofing salesmen doing work after a Monday night hailstorm. The workers were described as wearing surgical masks and blue polo shirts and shorts. Officers said one of them was black. He was identified later as a 20-year-old football player for Colorado State University who worked part-time at the company. The other alleged victim, 27 years old, police said there was no evidence they were engaged in wrongdoing. I mean, that, of course, has got to be directly attributed to the president constantly talking about Antifa and that they're going to be coming to your neighborhood and knocking on your door. The scary times continue, and you know what else is continuing? The pandemic. The numbers continue to rise in states across the country, and I'll be talking about that more this week with experts and epidemiologists. It would seem that nobody knows what the hell is happening in terms of how this disease is spreading and who it affects, and so much of what we thought we knew seems to be not necessarily always accurate, but there still doesn't seem to be any reason as to why it would go away, why there wouldn't be a second wave. You saw markets crashing last week, and I have no idea what's happening on Monday because I'm taping this just before Sunday night, but I'm sure it's not going to get any better. What the hell do I know? I'll talk to Barry Ritholtz this week as well as others. Hopefully we'll get epidemiologists on and other health experts too. So that continues to be a terrifying, unsettling, life-altering story. And my first guest, though, let me just say, Ted Alexandro and I had an amazing conversation, and that is coming up after my conversation with Andrew Ford right now. Actually, my excellent conversation with Ted Alexandro starts at 38 minutes, if you want to jump to it. And let me just tell you about this guy, Andrew Ford, who is a really great old-school journalist who works for the Asbury Park Press, which is part of the USA Today giant network. He also worked with ProPublica. And I saw this piece at ProPublica called "I Cover Cops as an Investigative Reporter. Here are 5 ways you can start holding your department accountable." And I thought it was a really interesting set of ideas for all of us to think about and potentially use in our local police departments. He says police culture can be insular and tough to penetrate, but the public can hold law enforcement accountable. And then he lists the different ways you can do it. We have a conversation about that. This is a guy who's a great reporter. He has been holding law enforcement accountable as a journalist for a long time. He exposed how New Jersey failed women police recruits as on a physical test at a shocking rate after a rule change that made it impossible to become stronger during the academy. I talked about that with him. Also, he showed how police car chases killed at least 63 people in the past decade and injured more than 2,500, nearly half of whom were bystanders and cops. Cases often start with traffic violations, usually don't end with arrests. The findings prompted 2 lawmakers to call for change, with one saying it appears there's a lot more harm done than good right now. And we talked about that. And also, he, amongst a number of other accolades or achievements, fought for public records to break news that a police captain was on drugs and drunk when he lost control of his car and died in a crash, and later identified more than 100 towns that did not randomly drug test cops. I talked about all of this with Andrew Ford, who I highly recommend you follow on Twitter at Andrew Ford News, at Andrew Ford News, and read at ProPublica and Asbury Park Press USA Today. Here now is our conversation. So I have him now super impressed with the work that he has been doing for a long time. He's an old school journalist practicing old school credible journalism. Andrew Ford, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Pete. Thanks for having me on today.
How long have you been a journalist?
Ooh, let's see. I started working full-time in 2012. So that is 8 years now.
Yeah. For you to do the type of work that you do, you have to act like you're an investigative reporter. And so you act very much like kind of an investigator, a detective trying to run down a story. Explain a little bit, if you don't mind, what investigative reporting looks like.
The basic task of any reporter, and this is just my personal philosophy, basic task for any reporter is to answer the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Probably heard that before. I think investigative reporters, really good investigative reporters, can do a lot to answer that why and how. So we might see a problem happening. Maybe we hear from sources that some problem is happening, and we try and explain how and why that problem is happening and maybe what could be done about it.
So you use investigative reporting techniques to keep police accountable, to strengthen police accountability, and you are sharing the techniques that you're using with the public. For your latest piece over at ProPublica titled, I Cover Cops as an Investigative Reporter, here are 5 ways you can start holding your department accountable. And it's so important and such a great resource. And I appreciate you putting this out there for folks. And I want to obviously talk with you about it. But I just have to wonder, you're an investigative reporter. You've got all these, you know what you're doing and you understand these things and you're sharing them with the rest of us so that we can use these similar techniques. But I guess my big question in reading this piece was, don't they see you coming, Andrew? Won't they see me coming? Oh, here comes this annoying guy that's going to ask us about our police force and questions about accountability. And he's trying to get us in trouble and, expose us. And I mean, I feel like right away, that's what I would run up against if I went into my local police department and asked some of the questions that you suggest we do.
Good question. I've covered cops in New Jersey for a number of years now. We've done some great investigative reporting that has prompted change. And so I wrote this story just recently on kind of the top 5 techniques that I use, the basics of my approach to doing this, that really anybody in the country could apply to certainly any police department, probably any branch of government. And I would encourage them to do so. We're all taxpayers in this thing. This is a lot of your money going to work here, and you deserve to know if you're being well served by the thing you're paying for, I think. In terms of whether they'll see you coming, they might. One of my tips is that when you go about requesting public records, especially on the local level, you might be the first person that has gone asking for those records, a trove of records. You might be the first person who has tried to look for a trend in those records. And when you bring it up with your local leaders, that might be the first time that they're hearing about it. And results may vary. Not everybody loves being criticized, but sometimes leaders can be pretty receptive, if you approach respectfully to having a conversation about this thing they may not have known about.
We are entitled to those records as taxpaying citizens. Legally, they have to hand over the records, most records, but not all records are equal. And some things are redacted and some things are maybe ongoing investigations. And obviously some things they probably just don't want us to have or see. How do you break that down? What are we generally entitled to see? And how well are those records kept?
That is going to vary tremendously
by department,
on what state you live in, by department. So what I try to get into in my guide for folks is how to look up the rules in your state. A lot of states begin with this presumption that every document the government has is a public record, and then exemptions are an exception. So the things they're going to deny you access to, that's supposed to be the exception to the rule. And there's this overarching presumption that the public deserves access to these documents. These are taxpayer-funded records. Well, you paid for them. They're yours. Go ahead and ask for them and for whatever you want and see what's in there. I always start by assuming that something is public and let this records clerk or records custodian explain to you why you can't have it. And it is time consuming, although it's not that hard to go ahead and if they quote you some kind of case law or some statute, go and look that up and challenge it if you can.
That's hard to do, but if you have any trouble with that, let me know and I'll find you a legal expert that can help you, folks. But I would also just imagine that, you go in the police department, you ask the kind of questions that you're suggesting, and they'll say, sure, and then slow walk you, never get back to you, be annoying, not give you the information, give you a hard time. But is that different from department to department about how that works? Does that ever happen? Does it feel like they're just ignoring you or slow walking you, if you will?
Sure. That varies tremendously. So some departments are, really modern and take a sort of open-minded view on this. You go in there, you ask for records. You file a formal request and they're going to comply with the law. This will again vary by state. Where I'm at in New Jersey, they have 7 business days to respond. And, sometimes they'll play games with that. They might ask for an extension. There's this whole thing about how the state recently just changed the law. So during coronavirus, like that 7-day deadline's a bit up in the air, that they're supposed to make a reasonable effort to meet it. And so, some agencies are pretty cool and will, respond in a reasonable amount of time, and others will drag their feet. But that kind of dovetails with my fifth suggestion, that you're going to have to follow up relentlessly. Like, change is not going to be made the first time you bring up this issue. You may not get what you're asking for the first time you ask for it. You got to stay on it in order to get what you're looking for, but it can be done.
So to illustrate some of the suggestions here, I was wondering if you could talk to me about the investigation that you went into, looking into the dangers of police car chases, and going back to something that you mentioned earlier about the who, what, when, where, why. Why was this an issue that you wanted to look into, police car chases?
Yeah, so I've been looking into different policing issues for years, and I had just seen a lot of what we call daily news stories. So kind of like breaking news of the day about car chases. These daily stories are sort of something that you do within the course of a day, just includes the basic facts, the who, what, when, and where. But I was interested in the how and the why, because I noticed that fairly frequently it looked like people were getting hurt in these. I noticed and this goes back to my tips, that there are these records retention schedules. The government keeps schedules of what kind of documents they have in their files and how long they keep them for before destroying them. And in one of these documents, I noticed that the government keeps this summary of police car chases. I got a copy of the thing and noticed that there's a breakdown for each department. How many chases they go on? Did anybody get hurt or killed? Was anybody arrested? And so I realized if I gathered up a bunch of these, I could try to judge the effectiveness of police car chases.
And what did you find out? Because, I think everybody should read this reporting, but I think the conclusion of that investigation is pretty important.
Give me just a second. Let me refresh my mind on that story. But essentially that a lot of people were getting hurt and killed in these car chases. Very frequently, the car chases did not end with an arrest. Even when somebody was arrested, they weren't usually charged with a serious crime. And New Jersey, in particular Newark, led the nation for racial disparity in the car chase deaths.
You also did a deep dive in a related story, and you write about this at the ProPublica piece, talking about how you did it, about drug testing in police departments after a police captain was killed in a car crash in 2016. What did you find out?
I think that story, that series of stories, is probably the clearest example of my philosophy as an investigative reporter and a pretty common approach to the job. A colleague wrote, I didn't write about it initially. A colleague wrote about a police captain killed in a car crash. I learned that he was drunk and on drugs at the time. I spoke to his chief about it and learned that the department didn't have a policy for random drug testing. So I was sort of curious about that. I found this statewide policy that departments were allowed to choose whether they want to do random drug testing. So I became pretty interested. How many departments are not doing random drug testing? So I filed these formal records requests with every department in the state, found more than 100 departments didn't do random drug testing, creating the kind of risk that allowed this one captain to be killed in a car crash. After we published this story, the Attorney General implemented or required that all police departments in the state conduct random drug testing.
Such a really important and fascinating and I mean, I'm naive, I guess, but surprising issue. I just assumed that cops didn't really do drugs because they would be worried about losing a great job and a drug. Finding drug in their system, they're probably. I just again made an assumption that if there was drugs in their system, there would be some kind of policy of intolerance. Can you recall, or do you know about what the general policies are with if they get caught using drugs? Is that I just assume cops didn't use drugs. I mean, call me a naive person. I am on this for sure.
Sure. So there was a policy that if there was reasonable suspicion that an officer was using drugs, they would be tested. But this like random drug testing thing is like an additional measure to be vigilant on that issue.
Interesting. I just had no idea. I also didn't know anything about something called job hopping, I guess it's called, where cops who've been in trouble, caught doing something wrong, have credibility issues, whatever it is, and if they get fired, they can find another job. And this has come to my attention a lot with a lot of the activism that we're seeing, which is if you get fired from one police department for some kind of misconduct, another police department shouldn't hire you. What is this story about that you published back in December 2019?
Yeah, there are like several layers to unravel there. New Jersey is one state where a police officer's disciplinary history is a very closely guarded secret. So much so that a new hiring agency can't necessarily see it. They can ask for it, and if like a potential new hire were to deny their access to it, that would raise a red flag. But they don't just have automatic access to it. Similarly, if somebody is accused of a crime by a police officer, and they, let's say, have doubts about that officer's credibility, they have very limited access to know if that officer has had credibility issues in the past. And there have been a couple of recent reforms in the state to address both of those things. There was a measure that requires the transfer of an officer's internal affairs materials when they move between departments for a new job, as well as some measures put in place to make sure that prosecutors better keep track of an officer's personnel history.
Just that the history, the officer's history, I want that to be public. I want it to be posted. I want it to be easily accessible. If there have been a number of complaints against police officers, from the police officer's point of view, maybe we're not getting both sides. Maybe it doesn't. It's somehow done unfairly. I think there should be a process by which it's done fairly, and that we can know that every cop on our local department, wherever we live, we can see their records. And if one cop has, a couple of strikes or a lot of complaints, I mean, there's this kind of reputation currency that would matter in police departments. How hard is it for you as an investigative reporter, or me as a citizen taxpayer, my local department, which you can't speak for, I realize, to go and find out and ask, I'd like to see a record of the complaints from citizens of this town against police officers in this department? How hard is that to get?
That is going to, again, depend tremendously on which state you live in. So in New Jersey, that's very hard to get. We're limited to these summary reports on how many complaints came in the door and the basic disposition of those complaints, but you can't see it attached to any officer. In other states, like I used to work in Florida, that was much more open. You could see complaints and outcomes against individual officers. In New York, let's say, I was just reading some headlines this week that following protests after the death of George Floyd, the state was moving to change a law that had blocked access to those kinds of personnel records. So that may be changing in New York.
One other story I wanted to ask you about, which I thought was really interesting, was about how a police department, I think it's in New Jersey, where you cover, had failed women police recruits, female police recruits on physical tests up to 13 times as often as men. When I first started reading about that, I thought, well, they're not physically as strong as men, and so maybe we need to take a look at that test. Maybe it's being done on purpose to make it harder for women who don't typically have as much upper body strength or something like that. I didn't know. So what is the truth of, what did you find out about why women police recruits were failing this physical test up to 13 times more than men?
Sure. So there was a gap between men and women, but that gap became much larger after a rule change that shortened the amount of time that a recruit had to become stronger during the academy. The data was very clear on this, that gap was up to like 13 times, women failing up to 13 times as often as men. And the response generally was that, the police academy is not a health spa. You're supposed to come here prepared, ready to pass this test. The requirements for the test are posted online. It's pretty clear what you're going to be expected to do. But I think the counterpoint is that New Jersey ranks relatively low in the nation for the participation of women in law enforcement. And if there is interest in getting more women into law enforcement, perhaps there's more the state can do to help them pass this test that they've decided they want police officers to be able to run and do push-ups and these different things. Is there more we can do to help women become as strong as we would like police officers to be? And the folks in charge implemented something rather like that at a hearing that was held on this story last year. The head of the organization responsible for police training rules announced that academies would open their doors to help recruits train before the academy in the interest of helping women and men become as strong as we want police officers to be.
Your investigative reporting over your career has created a lot of change and reforms in police departments, and it's really impressive. And I hope that you're proud of that reporting. But you've made these suggestions at the piece at Pro Publica, so we in the public can follow the things that you've learned, lessons and rules that you've learned to create change. And going back to that piece, I just wanted to ask you about how you do what you suggest, identifying power players and engaging them. I thought that was one of the kind of most challenging but important lessons in this piece.
Yeah. And this is probably a good moment to mention that, yes, my experience as a reporter is perhaps different than what an average citizen's experience might be. I'm willing to bet that police leaders are going to be a little bit more responsive when I come calling. But I do believe that if a respectful, concerned citizen, calls and asks for their local chief or tries to set up some kind of meeting, that they can get some response from their local police department. It is helpful to approach them respectfully, make sure that you have your notes in order, try to stay focused, try to consider the counterpoints. But I do think that it's possible to raise a concern to your local officials.
And so identifying the ones that are in charge, like the chief of police, and trying to engage with them, you suggest is the best way to go about it?
Yeah. So even before you go about engaging that person, figuring out if they are the right person to bring your grievance to, that police chief might be bound by some statewide law or a countywide policy. And if that is really the issue you're concerned with, then there would be other players that you would have to go talk to.
Well, this is such a great piece, and it's so great to discover your work as a journalist. And before I let you go, I just wanted to talk a little bit, just to ask you about, how journalism, how you're seeing the business of journalism work today, because your work is partially funded by ProPublica, which is a not-for-profit. You also work for Gannett papers, but everybody knows, and we've talked a lot about the death of local journalism, and you know this as well as anybody else. You've probably seen a lot of your colleagues lose their jobs and have to adapt and change careers maybe. And there's just not nearly enough local journalism, and it's because you can't make a living doing it. You can't fund a journalistic outlet. Things are changing. Independent projects have popped up. I'm trying to do it myself in a way by talking to smart journalists like you. But how do you see the current state of local journalism, and how important is it to have organizations like ProPublica funding your work?
It's certainly incredibly helpful to get essentially a grant from ProPublica to work on this project this year. That is a game changer. No doubt things are difficult on the business side of the local news business. The demand for credible information, I don't think has ever been greater in human history. The consumption of information, I don't know, has ever been greater in human history. So if there is that demand out there, I think there must be some way to find a way to supply to it. And I hope that it is local newspapers. I think they have been doing important work for decades, and I would like to see them continue to do important work.
And just finally, I ask a lot of journalists this question, just kind of nuts and bolts. You go out and report a story. You have to bring it back to editors. You have to fact check it. And if it goes to print or to post and something's wrong, I imagine you have to issue a correction. How is that about how your work is done?
Yeah, we issue corrections promptly if we make mistakes. But we work really hard to make sure that we don't make mistakes. We are very thorough in our reporting. I personally have a fact-checking process where, might be more than once, I'll print out a draft of the story and check off every single fact in the story with a red pen, going back to the original, interview notes or source documents, to make sure that every single fact in our story is accurate.
I appreciate you joining me, and I really appreciate your work, and I hope everybody will look it up and read you at ProPublica and follow your lead and your advice on how to hold police departments accountable. Andrew Ford, thanks for joining me. I hope to do it again soon.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yep.
I thought that was an angle that we hadn't really explored here on the show, something that can enable you and empower you to make sure that your police departments are held accountable. And I highly recommend that you follow him on Twitter at Andrew Ford News. Tell him you heard him here on the show. Tell him you heard him, I say, at Andrew Ford News on Twitter. Go say hello. Say, I heard you. I appreciate your reporting. And I am now following you on Twitter. And I don't know, send him some money. And subscribe to ProPublica. It's great news organization, nonprofit. Investigative journalists. Aren't they the best? Aren't they American treasures, the good ones? He is one of them. Okay, now my conversation with Ted Alexandro, who I caught up with on Friday. Ted is simply one of the best people I know. He has a new stand-up special coming out later on at the end of the week. I will be touting it and talking with him probably next week again about it. We'll be plugging it more. He's also now on Patreon. Ted is a fascinating guy. He's joined me here a couple times on the podcast before. He used to join me fairly regularly over at SiriusXM. Not too often, not enough, but he'd certainly been on that show a number of times. But most importantly, Ted and I know each other from the New York City comedy scene, and we became close personal friends years ago. I trust him. I admire him. I have a great deal of respect for him. And I think this conversation is really a good one. I'm very proud of the exchange of ideas that we had, and just a great conversation for white folks especially to listen to, as we talked mostly about racial injustice, Black Lives Matter, and what we all can do better. Here it is, Ted Alexandro on Twitter, at Ted Alexandro, TedAlexandro.com right now. And now I have Ted Alexandro joining me. We are looking at each other on a Zoom link, and I'm very happy to see you. Congratulations on the new special. It's hilarious, as always.
Thank you, buddy. I'm very happy to see you as well. And, yeah, man, it's exciting to, it's what we do, right? It's exciting to put out another special, number 5.
Now, these are, wow, congratulations, number 5. That's amazing. I remember when I used to pal around, Bill Burr and I used to be really good friends. We used to hang out a lot and have very, thoughtful conversations. And I remember him just telling me that I asked him, what do you want out of your career? And he said, honestly, just a body of work, which he has done and you have done the same thing, a body of work. 5 specials is a, that puts you in a kind of a class of your own. And they're all great quality specials. And so that's a class of very few people, I should say. That's very exciting. Congrats.
Thanks, buddy. Yeah, no, I agree with what Bill said. When you start doing this, you just want to kind of figure it out and get good enough to earn a few bucks. And then as you go along, I think you do kind of start to think of, a body of work. But that takes years, and luckily we're there.
Yeah, you certainly are. I mean, So let me, first of all, you were just a couple minutes late joining me, and you texted me, sorry, man, putting the baby down. And I just wonder how that works for you. I don't think you were putting the baby down. I think you forgot or something, and you can use sorry, just putting the baby down probably several times a day, I'm guessing.
That's true. That is true. That isn't a catch-all excuse for everything, but that is what I was doing. So it worked out. Putting the baby down, I don't have to tell you this. It's a challenge. That is it's almost like the bomb squad being called in, that you have to cut the right wire and put him down and hope that he doesn't roll at all, because if he rolls, he wakes himself up. It's a very delicate kind of process of, and several times you think you have it and you got to pick them up again. And that means another 20 minutes of, that's where I'm at. But,
it can be tough to control your schedule. Now, you guys, your son was born on the 25th. Is that right?
December 25th. That's correct.
Right. And we've talked about this before and the significance of that. But it was an interesting time to have a child, because when he was about 2 months old, 3 months, everything shut down. And I wonder how much you have been able to kind of think about the timing of all this and reflect on it, how much time maybe you were planning on taking off anyway. What has it meant for you guys to all be together there with your son in the first half of the first year of his life?
Yeah, no, I've been reflecting on that quite a bit, I'm grateful for that, just to be around my wife and my son. It's kind of a forced routine of really just the three of us for much of that time, as you know. But yeah, I think I'll appreciate it even more as I look back, because really what was on the horizon just as the pandemic hit was getting back to the road, touring with Jim Gaffigan, doing 2, sometimes 3 weekends a month where I'm hopping on a plane away from Thursday to Sunday. So yeah, I'm really grateful that there was a pause where I could kind of reprioritize. I mean, it was kind of forced again, but it gave me the opportunity to reprioritize and to really cherish the time.
What's it been like for you, your wife, your son, and that bird?
The birds are, we don't own.
They're inside with you, right? Obviously.
No, they're just outside.
They sound as if they are living with you, and I wonder if that is peaceful for you or if it has driven you mad because you can't get away from it.
Let me see if clearly it's driving you mad, Pete. So let me silence the birds.
It's fine.
God forbid a little nature should enter the airwaves, right? The sounds of nature. I only hope my child does not make a sound. I don't know. I don't know how to react.
It's fine. I don't mean you didn't have to close the window. So you have been really active on social media, and I don't know if you've been out joining the protests or not, but obviously you have cared about these issues and been invested in change for as long as I've known you, your whole life, I think. I think your parents brought you up that way. But how are you seeing what has happened over the past month or so, this recent Black Lives Matter movement? What do you think, because you've been involved from, as long as I can remember, the Occupy movement, you were really involved and out in the streets and all kinds of different progressive and certainly social justice movement. How are you seeing this? Do you think it's different like a lot of folks are saying?
It appears that way. It appears to be like a mass awakening to the atrocities, really, of white supremacy throughout American history, because, we can't really be, while we are grieving, obviously, the loss of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, it really requires us to zoom out, and I think more and more people are, to, the whole of American history, systemic oppression, white supremacy, systems that uphold all of these things.
Why do you think that so many of our white brothers and sisters have such a hard time understanding this and kind of accepting it? Because you and I certainly have seen this for what it is for most of our lives, I think it's fair to say. And not that we know everything, but we've been really curious and open about it. How much pushback do you get from other white folks or even white comedians that you might be hearing from on social media? Argument. I mean, how much I see you tweeting and saying things that are really bold and important, but I wonder how much argument you get, how much conflict it raises for you amongst your friends, family members, and other folks that you don't even know.
Well, luckily, family members, I would say virtually none. My family is left-leaning and progressive and aligned with all of this stuff. So fortunately, I don't have to worry about it at I was going to say family gatherings, but Zoom chats.
Yeah.
So that much is not only fortunate, but really has helped shape me, so that I am equipped when I'm talking to strangers or even acquaintances or maybe old high school classmates or fellow comedians, what have you. I feel equipped because I have been immersed in these types of things and reading, and kind of looking at it as a lifetime process of being a student of Black history, which is, of course, American history, and trying to explain that to people, and that these blips that occur where our consciousness is raised and aware of, whether it's Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, on and on. It's almost like, Pete, when you asked, do you think this time is different? When you ask that, you're talking about for white people. Is it different for white people this time? Because Black people are Black the whole time. They're Black when Eric Garner got murdered. They're Black when Sandra Bland got murdered. They're Black when George Floyd got murdered. So they feel these things acutely every single day. And we don't. We check out. And maybe it's not even intentional. Likely it is not.
Right.
So when you ask, is this time different? I think the real question is this time different for white people? I hope it is, and I hope more and more people do take an ongoing, not only ongoing, but lifetime approach, lifetime commitment to being aware of American history and the ways that it impacts the time that we're living in right now.
I think you're right about that. I mean, I just read yesterday this poll about how Americans' attitudes have changed on Black Lives Matter from approval from 27 to like 67% in under, I think it was like 2 years.
Isn't that something? 67% of whites think that it's bad that the police are murdering Black people. That's progress.
But
it is wild. A big jump. I'm not too.
You're right. Both are true. You can't believe that it took so long or that it was so hard to understand, but you're also happy that at least their attitudes are changing. It's true.
Absolutely.
I will, though, in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters, I do go out in blackface a lot to see what that's like. Have you thought about doing that just to try to be able to relate more?
That has not occurred to me, and I would suggest that maybe you not do it. I don't think.
I don't think I should.
Yeah, I just think maybe talk to a few more people before doing that. Halloween's a few months away. You have other options.
Maybe I'll dress as a Mexican then.
Yeah, there's easier targets, I guess.
That joke brings us to the police because when we talk about Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, people have a hard time sometimes understanding what the difference is. You talked about Black people are always Black. Cops aren't always cops. It's a career choice, and you take the uniform off at the end of the day, and you can go out in public and do anything you want with your family or friends, and no one knows even. What do you think? What do you generally say to people who argue that Blue Lives Matter or All Lives Matter?
Well, I think the first thing is that when those things are said to negate Black Lives Matter, it reveals a lot about the person saying it. That, nobody is nobody's bringing up whether or not Blue Lives Matter outside of the context of Black Lives Matter. Nobody's bringing up all lives matter outside of the context as a rebuttal to Black Lives Matter. So it's like whether or not you think all lives matter, whether or not you think Blue Lives Matter, can you first say Black Lives? Can I hear you say those words first? Can you say Black Lives Matter? And let that sit there. Can you let that sit there for a second? Or do you need to jump onto, but, you know what I mean? So they don't, I really think that these people, if you believe that all lives matter, you should have no trouble saying Black Lives Matter and leaving it at that. Black lives are part of all lives. That's the umbrella. It's part of what if that's your life mission statement, that all lives matter, Black lives are part of that. That's under the same umbrella.
I was doing a joke for a while back when we did stand-up comedy, where I talked about police lives matter. Police lives have always mattered. Everybody has always. If a policeman dies, even in an accident, they have a horse-drawn funeral and a 5-gun salute, and the family gets like $300,000. No one doesn't think their life doesn't matter. They like release partridges when a police officer dies. We've always been concerned when policemen die. If a black person dies, nobody's caring. The system doesn't care. Media doesn't care. Sometimes, your community doesn't care, and people are supposed to be numb to it and used to it. There's no doubt that the rest of our lives matter. That's the outcry.
Absolutely. The death of a police officer is never met with anything other than the utmost of solemnity and the utmost of press coverage, and the whole of the police force turns out, and the ceremonial kind of paying homage. So, of course, Blue Lives Matter to the system, as you indicated.
And again, the family gets a huge amount of money and benefits. Like, not to dismiss the not that anybody would ever trade that, but that's such an important issue that when your family member dies, you are not financially destitute the way that so many of these, obviously the rest of these people, the Black lives.
Yes, and I think it's important to point out that there's never any doubt as to how the police officer died. There's no cover-up. There's no systemic kind of trying to obfuscate anything. Whereas when a black person, oftentimes unarmed and completely innocent, is murdered by the state, by the government, by the police, it is not just the person pulling the trigger. It is not just Derek Chauvin murdering George Floyd. It is all of those officers watching. It is all of the officers who remain silent. It is everyone who fills out paperwork and says that that he had some pre-existing. The coroners who say that it was related to a pre-existing condition. And same with Breonna Taylor. They said the coroner in that case said she had no marks on her body. She was shot 8 times, and the coroner's report said no markings on her body. So we have to really...
How could that be? How could that possibly be?
Because it's not true. So that is really what we're looking at when we're talking about Black lives not mattering to a system that will murder them, and not only that, but cover it up. And to juxtapose that with exactly what you were talking about, the pomp and circumstance and ceremony that surround a police officer's death and burial, that's what a life mattering looks like.
I saw on Twitter you were tweeting about the Confederate statues being pulled down by activists and so on. You seemed upset.
Well, I'm upset that it has taken this long.
It's a great point.
I'm not a big fan of statues anyway, any statue. How do you feel about liberty? No, the French can take it back. I think we've sullied the intention of that statue. We have not lived up to it. I think that should long ago have been dragged into the harbor and floated back to.
I'm surprised Trump hasn't done something to that statue as a way to like insult the French. Like, I'm surprised. I mean, you know what? So I don't like your latest statue. Okay, we're gonna put a man out there. Okay,
That's right.
Himself. He's gonna replace labor. Yeah. It wouldn't be surprising, would it be?
Isn't it ironic and somewhat fitting that a woman represents liberty in America? Women who are constantly under attack and just their very right to make decisions about their own body. But you know what I was reflecting on, Pete? Like how we are inundated with messaging that kind of undergirds patriarchy, certainly white supremacy. I was just thinking about how, like, I was crossing the 59th Street Bridge, which they've renamed the Ed Koch Bridge. And then I thought to myself, Ed Koch was instrumental in locking up the Central Park Five. The five young black and Latino teenagers who were wrongly accused, and DNA evidence proved it years later. They were in jail for 6, 7, 8 years.
Yeah, horrible.
So these are the names that we pass. I was in Washington Dulles Airport. The Dulles brothers, they were like CIA, right, and all sorts of.
Read The Brothers. It's a book by, all of a sudden his name is escaping me, history teacher at Boston University. But it is, I had no idea about the Dulles brothers that you're just mentioning until I read this book by, I'm looking it up right now. It's
when I found out about them,
Stephen Kinzer.
Stephen
Yeah.
Kinzer.
Awesome guy. Awesome.
The Brothers is the title of that?
Yep, The Brothers. These guys were fucking assholes.
Yeah. J. Edgar Hoover building is the I saw the Lucas brothers posted that the FBI building is still known as the J. Edgar Hoover. That guy was decades of oppression.
A lot of shitty white men have had things named after them and still are. Where are you on Washington and Jefferson? There's been a movement to take their names off of things because they were slaveholders. Yeah.
Look, I'm all for it, man. Let's take it all down. They can still be in history books and stuff like that. But the brainwashing that we have been subject to.
Yeah.
From the time we set foot in a classroom, even a term like founding fathers, right, that we hear all the time. Do you think Native Americans thought of them as founding? You think black people thought of them as fathers? Like these terms that we're just inundated with. And again, we're supposed to kind of bow our head in reverence and, kind of not question anything. I think this is a great moment to really come to terms with the whole of American history and the people who have been left out, even from the Constitution, right? It left out women, black people. So, the fact that it, again, like you said, that it's taken this long for people to wake up, we have a lot of waking up to do.
We do. We absolutely do. And I feel like I haven't, done as good as I can, even for my daughters. I think that their view of people in different cultures and different colors is not where I would like it necessarily to be. And that's because of a lack of integration. It's because of kind of where we live. It's because of media, because of their friend groups. And I think about how, I can do better there for sure. I also think about another name that's been coming up lately, and I want to know what you think, because you're Italian and I'm Italian, and the Cuomo family is Italian, and our governor, who has been really feted over his reaction to the pandemic, and I know that you're not a huge fan of his, and we could talk about why. He draws the line at Columbus. Ted, some of these the Confederate generals, yeah, let's get rid of all of them, but you leave Chris Columbus right there. Where are you? You're an Italian. Do you hate yourself? Do you hate your ethnicity?
That's a good question. That's a really good question, and I get asked that a lot. Do you hate being white? Do you hate being Italian? Yeah, sure, okay.
Well, I don't think white is a thing. I think Italian is different. Ethnicity, religion. You don't choose your religion, but your ethnicity is a thing, and there's something to be proud of with certain cultural things. But white,
Right. It's a
my dad
construct.
just ended a friendship with a guy who in an email was basically like, I'm proud to be white. My dad's like, good, be proud to be white. You're no longer my friend. Like, I love that, number one, that my dad did that at his age to a guy he's known for a long time. But more importantly, like, white isn't a thing.
Exactly. And that's kind of first of all, I love your dad, and I picture him doing that on a weekly basis, just ending friendships.
He actually has been ending a lot of them. I mean, the guys that he is in circles with, it's just there's a lot of bigotry and ignorance, and he's burning them down, and it's absolutely beautiful.
That is beautiful, because that's really what we have to do is not stand for it, not take the easy way out and kind of just leave the conversation or say like, all right, I'll see you at church on Sunday or whatever. Like there is an easy way to kind of deal with that. But yes, we have to kind of simultaneously walk this thing of realizing race isn't even real. It's a construct meant to divide and to undergird a racial caste system, but also own the fact that it's very real and people are dying because of it, and I am benefiting because of it. So yes, I hate that aspect of all of these things. I hate the fact that I'm complicit. And, I think those, all of these statues that are, imagine walking past that statue every day on the way to work if you are a Native American person. Like, white people are used to kind of just being in the clouds of oppression and not acknowledging any of it, People are walking by these things that are symbols of murder, rape, pillage, atrocities, but meant to be celebrated, So we have to take hard looks at all of these things.
I know there's a ton of scholarship on this, but let's just talk from a layman's point of view, because this is what you're saying. We have been surrounded our whole lives by images of white people on our money. I think it's a huge one. All day, every day, we saw nothing but white people on our money. Yeah. Most of the statues, most of the paintings of the folks in the atrium at your school, overwhelmingly they are white men. Even our fictional
names of streets, bridges, airports, all of these things.
So that's the norm, and it conditions us whether we want it to or whether we don't. It's really interesting to see these rapid changes right now. We can talk about why. The statues being torn down, the potential of the military bases being renamed, parks and schools as well. But also, are we going to get a woman? There's not one woman on our currency. Is there Sacagawea? Maybe?
Oh, yeah. Maybe they made like a Sacagawea like dollar.
Like a special nickel or something. Yeah. Nobody sees... Nobody can use it. We aren't really using paper money that much anymore. Anyway, but it's still crazy that there's not a brown or black face or female on paper money or coins that we ordinarily use. And that matters. It matters to my daughters. It will matter to your son. Like I said, there's a lot of scholarship in this, but you don't notice how your biases form, but that's how they form. Santa.
Yeah.
He's white.
Most of your biases.
Megyn Kelly died on that hill. Santa is white.
How appropriate. Yeah. Well, I think, to be fair, most biases are not like from a seed of some sort of evil intent. I think they're rather from just a lifetime of being inundated and surrounded by imagery of, and I think it is important to say, both patriarchal systems that uphold male supremacy and, kind of white supremacy that is undergirded by all, in ways big and small, so whether it's the name of a statue, not the name of a statue to somebody, the name of a bridge, an airport, like you said, where's the airport named for a woman? Where's the bridge named for a woman? Where is on the currency? All these things. Like it really is. It's kind of violence in its own way. It's a passive violence that is created.
Really good points. Yeah, it's not necessarily done intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
So you also did you start the Lose Your Follower challenge? Had you seen somebody else do that?
I did. I kind of stumbled upon that. I put a challenge out to people to see how many challengers they could lose. How many followers they could lose by talking about Black Lives Matter, talking about systems of white supremacy.
Let me just, I'm just going to play that right now. I played it. And we're back.
So yes.
How did that go for you? And why, what is that about? What is the root of that? It's speaking out, saying your truth. And if people don't like it, and in your case, I mean, it matters. In my case, it matters because you have fans and followers that turn into money for buying your specials and coming to your shows. I have subscribers to this podcast. If I piss everybody off,
money with slaveholders on it. Remember, we were just talking about
right.
that.
That's right.
So look, I think there were two motivations behind it. One being kind of the pervasive, silly challenges that come up on social media that are more really about self-promotion than about anything else. You know, people taking videos of ice buckets and whatever the hell else, these things that come and go. Or even the celebrity culture now is, you know, where they look into the camera and they're like, I am the face of white supremacy, or whatever they say.
A bunch of actors made a video and they are getting really trolled for it. And I'm a little upset. I don't love that. I think that those actors had the best of intentions, and everybody's saying that's not nearly enough. You know, put your money where your mouth is. I don't know. I feel a little bit like uncomfortable with that. I agree it's not enough, and I agree it seems cheesy, but I don't know. It does feel like people are trying to do their best. You don't like it?
No,
they should have known. They should have known better.
Yeah. You know that old joke, Brian Regan? It's the least I could do. Believe me, if I could have done less, I would have. I was scraping the bottom of the barrel with that.
Right.
So I think, you know, it is well intentioned, and I will grant that. But why do they have to do it under the cover of, you know, kind of lining up a brigade of clueless white celebrities? Why don't you just make your own? You all have social media accounts, right? Just make your own video and talk to the camera and say what your thoughts are. Why does it have to be this PSA where you're aligned with these pristine white people? And it's like, you know, we're all, you know, like we're saying, you know, all of us together are saying, nobody ever just stands alone and says, like, here's what the fuck I think, you know, here's what I've done wrong.
There probably was publicists vying to get their clients, their actor clients, in those types of little videos. I bet.
I can't believe how clueless people can be. But to your point about what I did, so it was a joke, kind of commenting on these challenges that pop up on social media. But also, I was kind of pointing out, because I was having conversations with people or seeing in feeds people kind of lamenting the fact, or even celebrating the fact, that they were like losing followers. And really how that idea is so much baked into our current social media age, where there is a calculation constantly of, will I lose followers, i.e. money, right? So what does that really...
Fame, ego,
What does that really say? What that says, will talking about injustice, will talking about police murder, unaccountable police murder, this culture of unaccountability and white supremacy, will talking about that cost me money, is really what people are saying. So I was saying, yeah, fuck it. Lose them all. Lose them all. Who cares? This is the right thing to do. This needs to be what we are talking about. And if you are equivocating or trying to figure out how that's going to impact your purse, well, then guess what? That's exactly what has kept this going for centuries. That's how slavery started. It was a financial decision. It was an economic decision. It's cheaper to have slaves work for you than to pay someone, right? So, like, it's really, it's all kind of wrapped up in the same types of dynamics, whether we want to look at that or not.
Here, I love it, and I love that rant you just said outside of the clear sexism of using the word purse. Could have gone with finances or bank account. Now, to be fair, I know you do actually carry what it would be traditionally referred to as a lady's purse,
yes.
So it's acceptable for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I can use the term.
Where are you on fanny pack?
Not a fan.
No, you're not.
No.
Okay.
I mean, but I'm only, I'm only new to fatherhood. That could change. We've been quarantined.
Where are you on strapping your child to your body? I feel like I've seen images of you where I don't want to plug the specific brand, but I know there was one called the Baby Bjorn where you carry your child on the front against you.
Right.
Are you doing this?
I love it. Yeah. No, I embrace that. I celebrate it. Yeah, I mean, it's as close as I can come to kind of feeling the in vitro, like I'm carrying a baby. I'm 9 months pregnant, basically.
Yeah.
Plus,
it's the greatest. It's the greatest going out there with your child against you. I used to love that, and I still do. I rode on my mother's breast when I was home this past weekend. I strapped myself to her just for purposes of nostalgia and to go viral on Instagram. Yes. She was not interested in it, said it really bothered her back. Yeah. Police, what we're hearing now is this phrase, defund the police, abolish the police. Is there any phrase that resonates more with you? And what do you think about the backlash we've seen of those? The most common one is, really going to get rid of the police? What are you going to do when you have a problem? Who are you going to call? It's obviously not a very nuanced conversation on social media, but what do you think about this movement?
Well, I don't think this movement should be led, A, by white people, or B, by somebody who just saw the phrase defund the police for the first time this week. These are conversations that have been going on since the 60s, abolish the police, defund the police. So I think, I just read a really good article in the Black Agenda report about community policing, defunding the police, and the various kind of nuances about what these things could look like and what they could mean. I am in favor of abolishing the police as it currently exists, because it essentially equates to kind of an occupying militarized force, especially in communities of color, vulnerable communities, immigrant communities, poor communities. So, I think we have to reimagine what the police look like and what their mission is, really, because as it works now, it is not serving and protecting the public.
Yeah, I think that's the nuance we need, and I appreciate the perspective of how far back people have been saying this. I also just subscribed to the Black Agenda report while you were talking. I'm not even familiar with that, but I also think that it's just the way I would explain it is take the budget that the police department has and use it, redistribute it. You could still have law enforcement, although it could be handled much differently, from the uniforms to the training to the qualifications, and redistribute that budget in a way that will do what law enforcement's supposed to do, which is bring down crime rates. And generally speaking, if you give people more opportunity in education and healthcare, that will bring down crime rates. Yeah. And it's not this hammer and nail and this idea of that. I'm sure you're thinking a lot about raising your son and how you're going to affect his behavioral change. And even now, when he's crying, you're thinking about what will make him, what's the best thing to do. And we have learned that it's not necessarily punishment. They used to. I just heard some podcast where they're talking about history where they used to, cut people's hands off if they stole something. And then the progressive solution was to put them in prison, put them in cages. Yeah, well, we were more evolved now than that. We have a lot of research. We have other countries that are doing similar things. We can do a lot of other things to bring down crime and to keep people safe. That's what we need to do. Sorry for the rant, but I mean, I'm just kind of adding to what you said about how we abolish the police, then defund the police and change the dynamic.
Yeah, again, I think it's important to realize that these conversations have been ongoing for decades, if not centuries. So this notion that black communities have not been in any way trying to reform things or been in dialogue, they've gone through all of the proper channels. Like, how do you think protests happen because it's the last resort. They've gone to town halls. They've gone to these kind of liaisons where they speak to politicians, community leaders. They
voted, tried to vote.
Yeah, yeah. They've done everything that they were told were the proper channels to affect change in their communities, and nothing changes, right? So then what do you do? I think really what I find is the answer is asking the people. It's a very, very simple answer, and it's the last one on their list of things to do because they don't want to solve these problems. Because really what it does is, again, it undergirds the socioeconomic system that we're living in, so they don't want to change that. They don't want to change that. But if you genuinely ask the community, I was thinking to myself, the way they do with the stupid debates, where it's on every channel, right? Every channel, it's the debates or the State of the Union, these kinds of things, where just across the board, it's on every channel. Yeah. Have a town hall with black communities where they have the microphone, they have the channels of
great idea,
and they tell you, instead of these white pundits or any pundit for that matter, just have the people who are living under these conditions, who have been talking about these things forever, let them tell America, tell the world, here's what our concerns are, here's what we would like to see implemented.
I'm actually going to, if they haven't already thought of it, I'm going to suggest to a friend of mine who handles a lot of that at CNN. That would be a really interesting thing to see on a cable news network.
Yeah, have we ever had like an all-black town hall?
No, we won't. Still, Anderson will host it, but I think.
Yeah. I mean, God bless him. He's doing good work. He's out.
He's one of the good ones. Don't get me wrong, but no, it should be. Well, I mean, I've been going public, and I would like a pat on the back from you because I've been tearing down, and I want to continue doing this. The MSNBC and CNN publicly, who have both paid me because of their lack of black faces in the anchor position. It's so glaringly embarrassing now. Like, everybody is looking at their industry, their companies. What can we change? Where are our blind spots? How are we missing so much? How can we advance black folks and give more opportunity to them? And it's like, okay, well, media is doing that too. And you need to have more people in the anchor position. And it's like MSNBC, it's like a slam dunk. Like they fired fucking Chris Matthews. There you go. That's 7 o'clock slot. I mean, prime time. All right, before I let you go, 2 more quick questions. What does the phrase social justice mean to you?
Social justice. That's a good question.
People will call you a social justice warrior, and it's meant as an insult.
Yeah, no, that's
and me
funny.
Too. But
yeah, no, that is. They try to turn any attempt to advocate for the rights of others into some sort of insult. But to me, social justice, it's relatively self-explanatory, but it is kind of nuanced at the same time. We're talking about, living in a society and liberty and justice for all and all these types of things. And the same opportunity at justice should exist for all, and the same opportunities across the board, from where people live, because we know real estate, of course, is horribly racist still, and we're still living very in segregated areas, sometimes by choice, usually by not by choice. So, yeah, I think, we have to explore all of the ways, because financial decisions are always really at the bottom of it. The neighborhood you choose to live in, the schools,
financial interests,
the schools you choose to send your kids to. That's where people's racism. Even the best intentioned, who I love all lives. Me.
We moved out of New York City and we moved to a school. We looked strictly for school districts. And we looked for, we read about their reputations and college acceptance and what happens if you graduate from this high school. And obviously we looked at taxes, but we didn't. And we looked at diversity, like ethnicity. It's outside New York, so it's pretty diverse. But it wasn't a deal breaker or a decision maker. And to be fair, like the school next door has a lot more black people in the district next door, literally across the street, than ours. And our whole community looks at that school as lesser than than ours. But when I look at it, I'm like, what are we talking about? Grades in college? Or are we talking about the experience that my kids will have and diversity that they'll be exposed to? And, I think about that pretty much every day, that we moved to the district that we moved to for the reasons I just stated. So you can talk about me.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, it's good.
But my wife is actually, I wanted to move to an all-black neighborhood, of course.
That's on the record.
Yeah, I fought very hard. There's all kinds of different records of that.
You're right, Pete. That, I think people sometimes fail to recognize that. And you had asked me about my family and how I kind of came to this, I guess, worldview. It is a lifetime kind of thing, but a lot of it started with schooling, going to public schools, going to integrated schools, going to schools where I was the minority. Junior high school.
Yeah, you grew up in Queens.
I grew up in Queens, yep. So I went to a junior high school that was more black and brown than white. I went to City College in Harlem to study jazz piano, and I was amongst, one of the only American white kids. They were international kids. So yeah, having an experience being the minority was an important one for me, especially in when I was studying jazz, because not only that, but these were like exceedingly talented people that, so I was the minority and I was not as talented as the people I was around. So all of these things are like, the lessons kind of seep into you in ways that's not why I went to that school, but that's one of the things I learned.
Yeah, I had a similar experience in college in that I basically hung out with and became part of a group of all black people because they were so funny, Ted. Like, I was like, oh my God, these guys are hilarious constantly every day. And I want that. And I mean, there were other cultural things that I was interested and curious about, but I had, simply when you're immersed in any other culture, you develop, you will develop it. Usually you probably chose that. But even if you didn't, you develop an appreciation, interest, or curiosity about it. Doesn't mean that you become it, obviously. But that's what diversity does.
That is the currency. Again, people think of currency as money always, right? But that is the currency of being around other cultures. And I remember having those types of feelings too. Like when hip hop first came about, and I was in pretty much elementary school, junior high school, and finding out about it from the black kids, from the Latino kids, my older brother who was also into it, just finding out and having your mind blown because you're not aware of this culture and right. Then like the love you have for it, the reverence that you have for it. And there's a currency to that I think it kind of seeps into your character, into your baseline, the way that you operate.
It's a great point about music, about art, and you have always, been a musician, and so has your family. So it's music never really touched me like that. I think we've talked about this before, but I graduated high school in '93. Hip hop did not make it to Marcellus, New York, in the '90s. A couple kids, but I wasn't interested. I didn't like it, and then, like I was talking about in college, all these guys were constantly playing and introducing me to different artists. I remember I still didn't like it, by the way. And I would tell them, I was like, I would tell the black guys, I was like, I don't get the Snoop. I remember we had this long argument about Snoop and about Biggie, but eventually I figured it out and it started to wear on me. And a lot of that stuff didn't ever make it into my playlist, but I learned so much from art because I guess my point is you might not be immersed in terms of where you live or where you go to school, but it isn't an excuse with the internet. And with art being everywhere and available now, it's harder to be an ignorant person in 2020 than it was even we were growing up. We have less of an excuse now, I think. Do you think is that true?
It is true. And I think, again, kind of circling back to what we were talking about of the people that traditionally are celebrated and the people that are upheld as heroes and as geniuses and as legends.
Yeah.
Like coming up through jazz, that was another gift of it that I saw people like Thelonious Monk and Ron Carter and Hank Jones, all these people that are, consummate artists and geniuses that the mainstream culture is not going to hold up the way they would, Beethoven or, even Duke Ellington and people like this.
Well, we're talking about music, but But we could talk about entertainment, comedy, and specifically the best is sports. Because I grew up with my heroes were athletes for a lot of my life, as a young man, and yes, some of those athletes were black, but they were mostly white. But regardless, if you go further back, they were all white, and that it was so obvious that they were locking out super talented black athletes. I mean, but that's all changing. It's diversity has immersed itself in so many more industries, but always in entertainment and music, and especially sports.
Yeah, well, and that's a good metaphor, because that's what they do in every industry. If they, like you said with a black anchor, if they let black women, black men assume those positions, they'll be great at that too. Just the way they were waiting to be allowed to play basketball, and they're great at it. They're a lot of times they've been waiting to be. Waiting is not even the right word, because that would be passive. But these are all
dying for an opportunity, working as hard as they can to get through the door, and that door not being open or being closed in their face. And again, not talking just about black folk, but talking about women and talking about anybody who's not non-white straight guy, I suppose, is the history of the country. What about the other question I want to ask you? I asked you about social justice, which, by the way, when I think of that phrase, I automatically think of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Like, he was a social justice.
He was good at it.
Warrior.
He was good at it.
Right?
Yeah.
He was good at it.
Yeah. Well, I think another element that I would like to just bring into it is I think social justice should have an element of agitation to it, and an element of getting people out of their comfort zone, challenging people.
Yeah.
And, the aforementioned Jesus Christ did that well, MLK, all of the people, and of course, I would suggest that the United States of America has actively tried to kind of whitewash his image into more of a passive love and peace kind of thing, instead of a lot of the fire, a lot of the agitation, a lot of the challenging of white supremacy and capitalism. So, that agitation, I think, is an important component.
All right. Patriotism was the question I wanted to ask. We played, the bit at the beginning here about, in your new special, about the national anthem. By the way, again, you being such a talented musician and comedian allows you to do such a great critique of that song, whereas I would have no idea what to say about it. It's not good music. It's not good lyrics, according to people who care and appreciate music. But more importantly, patriotism, like, what is that? What does it mean to you? I have a lot of mixed feelings about that word. I don't subscribe to it very much, Ted, and I certainly was raised to. What are your views on that word, on that feeling, on that idea of patriotism?
Well, I think the patriotism that is peddled to us and that is taught to us is one of exclusion. It's not a patriotism of critical thinking. It's not of looking at the whole of American history and the ways in which we oppress here at home, people of color, black people, slavery, systemic, police violence, all of the things that are still in place. And of course, around the world, the imperialism that is done in our names. So the type of patriotism that we are sold, and it is wrapped up in sporting events, it's wrapped up in things that get big numbers on television. That is not a patriotism of critical thinking. It's really not a patriotism of the truth. It's a patriotism of obeisance and kind of quiet and yes sir, no sir, and stand, authoritarianism. Do not question, do not kneel, stand at attention, watch the planes fly over, and shut the fuck up. So it's really more about complicity and quiet and obeying and authoritarianism than it is about the kind of patriotism that I am drawn to, and I would imagine you are as well, is one that really explores the truth behind, and that's really at the root of the Black Lives Matter movement, is like the truth is what is being squashed in all. Not only is the person being murdered, but then there's a whole line of people behind that are going to support the lie that it wasn't a murder. It was this, it was that, and that same is true with American history. All these lies piled one on top of each other, we're supposed to stand and salute as the planes fly over.
Well, yeah, I feel like what you're saying is that the patriotism that we've been conditioned to respect and support is a patriotism that is almost entirely filtered through our military and their role in fighting mostly foreign wars. I would say actually in almost entirely foreign wars, unless you want to talk about the American Revolution, because the Civil War is still being fought. And the kind of patriotism that appeals to me is the kind that celebrates all of our freedoms on paper. Peaceful protesting is the taking a knee is the kind of patriotism that I think is, that's what's great about America. And yet we are looked at as being anti-American or not patriotic for peacefully protesting. No, what's more patriotic than speaking your mind and peacefully protesting to create systemic change? It's as opposed to the war in Iraq where we were the bad guys.
Right.
I mean, how are we celebrating any of our most recent military conflicts, much less the machines that murder people from above? I mean, that kind of stuff is as fascinated as I am with military history and even those weapons and everything. Like, that's a weird thing to be. And for people our age, we haven't seen a war in our lifetime that we should have been in.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you can't really divorce the patriotism that we are sold from guns, from militarism. Like as a pacifist, you don't see them like beginning the Super Bowl with a group of pacifists walking out to hold the flag. It's always guys that have guns and are in uniform. Like, patriotism is not wrapped up in peace. It's not wrapped up.
Well, those guys are fighting for our freedoms.
That's true.
As opposed to the Black Lives Matter protests who are fighting for, oh, wait, they're also fighting. Well, they're fighting for, I think, more than anything at this point, to minimize it, a seat at the table.
Yeah, well,
Still.
It's an ongoing, really, war. It's a domestic war at home is what it's been, being waged by the state against black and brown populations.
What's more patriotic than taking down a statue of a Confederate general? Seriously. They were traitors. They were horrible, horrible traitors and people. Like, that's patriotic.
I guess the only thing more patriotic would be to whoever would have this capacity, if you can melt down the iron or whatever, and then, make that like a statue of Harriet Tubman or something.
That would be a very artistic, innovative patriot. Ted Alexandro, the new special. Very excited about it. Very excited about the work you do. I follow your lead so often morally. One of the few people who on social media, I'm like, look, whatever he says, I'm most likely going to agree with it and follow it. I appreciate all you're doing right now with your life, and joining me on the podcast is always one of my favorite people. Thank you. Great conversation.
My pleasure, pal. Let's keep doing it.
All right, that's it for today's episode of Stand Up with Pete Dominic. Today's guests were Andrew Ford at Andrew Ford News and Ted Alexandro at Ted Alexandro. I am Pete Dominic at Pete Dominic. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook and get a paid subscription right here for this daily show, which I am making my job. I'm going to be posting videos on YouTube and doing more stuff on Patreon, video, interviews, and get-togethers, and I want your ideas. What would you like to be paying for? Please sign up for a paid subscription, and if you're listening on any podcast app, then please give the show a rating and a review and all of the things that you have to do to make a podcast popular and findable. It's growing, and I appreciate all of your support each and every day. Look forward to talk to you tomorrow. And remember, you are not alone as you go through this journey in life. I'm with you. So many others are and have shared some kind of similar experience with you. So let's stay connected. Let's build this community. Let's support each other. You're not alone. I love you. I'll talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up.